Lynn Norment, a Tennessee native, is an American journalist known for 30 years of writing and editing Ebony Magazine, working her way up the ranks to managing editor, shaping the content of the magazine while interviewing some of the biggest names in black culture. In 2009, she retired and was inducted that same year into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame. We welcome her to With Noel Hutchinson. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to welcome to this platform Lynn Norment. She has done a masterful job. If you don't know who she is, I guarantee you by the time this interview is over, you're going to know exactly who she is. And so, Miss Norman, we welcome you to With Noel Hutchinson. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hutchinson. It is my pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Now, see, y'all, that statement there gave me goosebumps. But anyway, let me get past the goosebumps. Sister Norman, first of all, we have to start with the beginning of every story. So, kind of give us some background about your early story. Where were you born, and how did it impact you?
Okay. I'm proud to say I was born in Bolivar, Tennessee, a little over 60 miles from Memphis down Highway 64. Um, Born to a very modest but proud family. I didn't think we were poor, but in the greater realm of things, maybe we were. I don't know. My father uh, grew up on a farm. When I was born, he worked at a company that was a tannery, a leather hide tannery. And my mother died when I was 10. And my father pretty much raised us. He remarried. We had a stepmother. And of course, we had another sister. So my father had, what, altogether six daughters that he raised. But his message to us was he didn't use the word be independent, but he said, you know, go to college. These were mandates pretty much. Go to college, get your degree, get your job, buy some property, take care of yourself. The underlying message was don't be dependent on anyone else. And to his head, it was don't be dependent on a man, but do what you need to do um, to, take care of yourself and excel. And even though he only had an eighth grade education because he quit, sent his younger, he worked on the farm, his family's farm, sent his younger siblings to college. But my sisters and I knew that he was as smart, if not smarter, than any of them. And that played out throughout life. So I grew up in Bolivar, Tennessee. I went to Memphis State. I went there knowing I wanted to be a writer or a medical technologist or something in medicine.
Okay.
My first semester there, I did an outing to a hospital. I don't remember much, but I do think when I first saw blood, that was it for me. I came out of that knowing I would be a writer, and that had even been a part of my childhood and my high school. I would write poems and little stories in the margins of my homework and my notebooks. And I knew I wanted to be a writer. I wrote for the high school newspaper, it was a majority white school. And I excelled in the English classes and that kind of thing. I knew I wanted to be a writer, and that's what I majored in at Memphis State. And leaving there, I got at least in my last semester at Memphis State, I got an internship at the Commercial Appeal. And that's when we didn't have many Black people working at the Commercial Appeal. But I ended up getting that internship, and a lot of that had to do with a teacher I had at Memphis State. His name was Mr. Leon Long, Long. And at first, I didn't hear from the people at the Commercial Appeal. Um, and he asked me about that, and I told him I hadn't heard from him. And the next thing I know, I did hear from him.
Mm.
So, and he was working as a copy editor there, in addition to teaching at Memphis State. So, my first day of my internship at the Commercial Appeal, there was a huge shooting. I don't know if anything else like that has happened, but no, mass shootings are more common now than back then. But it was in the Kansas Street area of South
Hmm.
Memphis. I I sat there, it was the end of my workday, and I watched as with awe and big eyes that the night editor had come on, the day editor was still there. They were sending writers and photographers out to the site. And after things calmed down, they said, call my name, Norman, get over here. Of course, I wasn't going to say, I'm ready to go home. And they sent me out, but I was by myself. Didn't know where I was going. Still living at the Memphis State dorm, but I had a car. And I went out to my car, looked up the area on a map. My father was a great believer in maps.
Let me pause for a second. This is the days before GPS, y'all. So
Oh,
we need to say that for some of the younger ones who are listening, saying, "Oh, I
that,
didn't know where I was going," and they're saying, "Well, you could punch it in the GPS." I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, we didn't have GPS back then. I looked it up on a map, and to this day, I'm good at reading maps, probably
Hmm.
better than with GPS. And I found my way to that community, parked my car, got out, started walking up and down the street, talking to people who were witnesses and getting the names of victims and getting information about the shooter. And I ran into a very young Harold Ford. Now, I was just getting out, I was still in college. Harold Ford, I don't know if he might have been a state representative. I can't remember.
Hmm.
But we hooked up. He gave me the names of a number of people because his funeral home, he was there working for his funeral home. So he had
Hmm.
names and numbers, and he introduced me to people in the neighborhood because he knew them well. So I ended up calling in and taking photos by the office. And now we're talking about late at night. And my editor was very pleased. And lo and behold, the next day, my name was with the other reporters on the front page of the Commercial Appeal the next door.
Wow.
That was my first day on the job.
Wow.
Was I was happy. I called my father, and I grew up reading the Commercial Appeal, and he had it, and of course, making him proud was everything to me.
Hmm.
And so that's how my career started.
So
And
how did you make the transition from the Commercial Appeal to Ebony Magazine?
well, after being at Ebony a good 3 years, I went to Chicago for my father's baby brother's wedding. And he was late getting married. And a friend of mine in Memphis, and back then it was DeArmy Bailey.
Oh my goodness.
He said, Lynn, I just met this editor from Ebony. If you going to Chicago, give him a call. So when I got there, I called him And they said that particular editor was out of town. But the lady who answered the phone said, "Let me speak with the executive editor." And it was Herbert Nipson. He got on the phone with me and they invited me to come on by.
Mm.
And I did. And even met Mr. Johnson that day, John H. Johnson, the lead.
Hmm.
Didn't I had no idea I would, but he stepped out of a meeting to meet me, and I didn't realize they were looking for writers. And I did a freelance story on Al Green, and that's another whole story in itself. Al Green had started a church on the south side of Memphis. This was a year after what I call the Grits incident.
Hmm.
And Ebony wanted me to do a story on how Al Green was doing a year later. So I met Al Green. I rode with him in his big fancy car out to his farm, and we had a great interview. Um, and I don't mean to be long, but everybody knows Al Green is a little quirky.
Hmm.
He did not want me to write down anything. If I started writing, do you have to do that? He would stop writing and he would keep talking.
Hmm.
So I found that whenever I had a chance, if he walked out the room, or if I excused myself to go to the bathroom, then I would write down everything he had said. And in the end, on the way back to Memphis, I knew I had to ask the tough question, and that is, how are you doing after that tragic incident at your home? And that's when he told me and pretty much announced to the world he had started the church and he was
Mm.
a preacher, that he had been born again, although he grew up in the church, but he had had a revelation. And so I broke that story with Ebony, although we were not into breaking news, but that was the first that the world knew about that church. So I did that story, and Ebony offered me a job. I wasn't looking for a job, but I couldn't turn it down. And so that's how I ended up with Ebony. And I thought I'd be there a few years because journalists were known. You go here a few years, you go there and you work your way up. But I never left Ebony until I retired.
Well, we are the better for it. And let me say this to the viewing audience. I remember growing up in the 70s, every family on my street had a subscription to Ebony Magazine, and several had subscriptions to Ebony and Jet Magazine. Jet was the weekly, the
Yes.
small weekly. What I would do, I would buy mine at the subway. I was living in the Bronx then,
Okay.
on the way to wherever. And then we had the subscription. And one of the running jokes in our neighborhood is this: if your ebony was missing that month, don't get upset. The mail carrier probably took your ebony for that month, since everybody in the neighborhood was getting it. That was the running joke. That's
Yeah.
how pervasive what you did and how ebony was in our
Mhm.
community.
Yes. Well, I went there in the late 70s, and
Hmm.
Ebony was definitely throughout my childhood and college years on our coffee table in Bolivar, Tennessee.
Hmm.
When I learned it was everywhere. So it was a great way for me to get that job offer, and I was very happy. Of course, my father was a little reluctant until he visited me in Chicago. He was concerned about my safety, so but I showed him I lived in a very safe area, and he was pleased.
Yeah, understood. He was being daddy, so we we understand.
He definitely was.
Hmm. So now, talk to us about your time at Ebony, because you, as you described a little bit earlier, you started moving up the ranks, and if
Mhm.
I'm not mistaken with the title, you became managing editor,
Yeah,
correct?
I
So
became managing editor.
talk about all of that for the listener, for the viewer. What was that like?
It was a very intriguing time for me because here I am, just a little country girl, uh, and I'm working at this major company, but I've never been one to be a troublemaker, get my nose in other people's business. And I just did my work, established a good working relationship with my editors, made my deadlines. One thing very important about that job was to come up with story ideas. Once a month, we have a meeting, and you needed to come up with story ideas. And I always had some that got accepted. Of course, once they were accepted in the meeting by the editors, then they had to be approved by Mr. Johnson. So I became known for coming up with good story ideas. As I said, I minded my business because being a black company, it's a whole lot of stuff going on around you and getting that. And I just did my work and worked my way up. And after a few years, maybe within those first few years, I established good relationships with publicists for the entertainers, with the record companies, with the movie companies. And I ended up becoming the go-to person at Ebony because other writers would come and go. I was still there. I would be the one that they would present their story ideas to. I mean, outside people wanting to get their artists in, establishing a good relationship with them. And so when their artists had something big to release, they would come to me. So I ended up, doing cover stories. Then I ended up managing the staff, but I still did a lot of writing and a lot of cover stories. And I just eventually worked my way up through the ranks and became managing editor. But until the day I retired, I never stopped writing. As a matter of fact, I was doing a story on Beyonce as I was trying to get out the door.
Mercy.
Yeah, and that was intense, but got it done. Got it done. And
What were your three favorite interviews?
well, of course, the one with Al Green, because that was so intriguing, and I never had anything like that before, where someone, I mean, after that, where someone agreed to do a story for Ebony, but then they didn't want you to use your tape recorder or write any notes. Because at first we were just writing notes
Hmm.
before we even started using tape recorders, and that made it difficult. But he and I ended up becoming good friends. And matter of fact, yeah, after I did the story, and then I got the job offer. And so he and I were already friends and kind of hanging out. I would go to his church and all. So Al Green was intriguing, of course. And because his story ended up getting me the job at Ebony, he's close to my heart and top of my list. And he did have a good story. Another story that I treasure is with Tina Turner.
Mm.
Yeah, now I'm from Bolivar. She's from outside of Brownsville in Nutbush. She had heard of Bolivar. I'd heard of Nutbush and Brownsville. So when she and I first met, we had a lot to talk about and we connected a bond. I ended up interviewing her three, four, not five times and doing a story. Now, that endeared me to Mr. Johnson and the people on my job because back then Tina Turner was all about her. It was her legs were beautiful, her voice, and at that point she had left Ike and had struck out on her own, was a big star all over the world, but I was the connection. And so that was part of well, I just was doing my job. So, but it turned out well. So Tina Turner always was a favorite story. And then there was BB King. BB King was very interesting and just been a down to earth man. And he was telling me he wasn't married. And, although we all knew he had all these children and stuff, but I think he was kind of flirting with me.
He probably was.
Right. He let me know he was single and da da da. And later I said, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so I did that because he had never been in Ebony. He told me that during the interview. And so I told my editors at Mr. Johnson, and they went on and put him on the cover because they
Mm,
had that much respect for him and said, oh, he never been. Yeah. So that endeared me to him, and BB King was very, very happy with that. And then, of course, in later years, it was Beyonce because I met her when she was 15. It's not like I was that much older, but she was that young starting her
mhm.
career. And she was with the first group of girls that she performed with. And then I interviewed her and set up a photo shoot, and all of that worked out well. And then when that broke up, I'm still good with Beyonce and her mother. And so I interviewed her all the way through her career, up through being the last story I did while on the staff at Ebony.
Okay. Um, I may be wrong, but I think you had a legendary interview with Whitney Houston. Talk
Yeah,
about that.
I can't forget Houston, Whitney. She and I had a close relationship as well. She wouldn't let anybody else at Ebony interview her, so that was very special. And when she got married to Bobby Brown, I was invited to the wedding. Although nobody could have a camera, you weren't supposed to be taking notes, but we had the exclusive story, so I could get anything I needed to write about, but they supplied the photographs. And that was a very special event. And before that, I'd been to a couple of other parties that Whitney had hosted another at her home. But when I first met Whitney, and she had just made that first album and was becoming a very big star. I set up an interview. Mr. Johnson forced one of the editors. I told him, now Lynn's doing everything. You all need to be doing this. You need to set this up. You need to set that up. So somebody else set up some time and talked to her people and did this. But nobody, Witness people didn't bring it up. Ebony's people didn't bring it up. The wardrobe. What were we going to photograph her in? So I get there in New York at a studio, and they're saying, did you bring wardrobe? And I'm saying, no. Did you? And since we hadn't even gotten sizes and stuff, so everybody just kind of messed up that day.
Mm,
So I had to hustle and back in the office, and we found someone to go out and find some wardrobe for Whitney. But that left a lot of hours and a lot of time for me to be very, very uptight about how we were going to pull this off. Because she did not want to do the interview until the photographs were done. She wasn't mean. And when
mhm.
I was out there nervous and wondering how this was going to turn out, she would come to me and say, it'll be okay, Lynn. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. And that was my first time meeting her. So, anyway, it did turn out well. We got a beautiful cover shot because we had one outfit that worked, and it had to work, and it did. And then she and I went to another location, I think to the record company, and just had a great interview. And then I had many great interviews with Whitney after that, sometimes just by telephone because she knew me so well. Other times I flew wherever she was. One time she was in a gorgeous high rise um, apartment overlooking Miami on one of those islands off the coast of Miami. And that was intriguing for me. Another time on the set of Waiting to Exhale, and she had her baby then, and her baby seemed to have, and she was a little toddler, had fallen in love with me, and I'm on the floor playing with her. Bobby Brown is there. And it's just so many different experiences with Whitney, and they were all good. They were all good. Now, when she started having her drug problem, my editors kept urging me, call Whitney, talk to her, get her story. But I did not want to do that kind of story on Whitney. And maybe that's when my failure or whatever, my shortcoming as a journalist came in. I just couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. Um, And then, because I kept thinking she's going to overcome this, she's going to make a comeback, and that's when I'll interview her. But unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Well, this leads to my next couple of questions. I'll put them together.
Okay.
Um, Talk to us about the reach of Ebony. You kind of alluded to it, but specifically talk about it. And really, the question before that ought to be, did you feel a responsibility in telling our story, which you kind of alluded to as well? Kind of talk about those two things for us.
Yes, I felt a great responsibility. Um, Ebony to me was more than a job, more than a career. I felt like I was working for my people, for the community. And of course, working with John H. Johnson and Lerone Bennett, especially in all the great books that he wrote, um, it nourished that kind of feeling and dedication to my job. I felt like it was my duty to do a good job, to make sure my information was correct, and to find interesting Black people in America to write about. I felt like my job was a duty or a service to my community. It was my way of giving back. So that always, made the job seem more than worth it, although it was worth it on its own. Um, Now, what was your other question? I'm sorry.
Well, you kind of bundled them together because you felt the responsibility um, to really telling our story. And
Mhm.
and I talked about the reach of Ebony because
Oh, yeah,
you felt like this was our story and this was about us.
definitely. And the reach of Ebony, of course, growing up in Bolivar, Tennessee, and having Ebony on our coffee table and saving all the back issues and Jet. Um, I know it reached out to me and the people in Bolivar, but of course, working at Ebony, I realized how far indeed the reach was. And that made my job even more important to me because we had people who didn't see positive news about Black people anywhere else, Ebony and Jet. They were the only two publications at the time in the early days that made a point of writing about Black people and the positive things that Black people were doing. And John H. Johnson started um, Ebony in 1945. I will say that's long before I was born.
Hmm.
But I think back then, Black people didn't have any way to get news. The only news they got was about the negatives, if they got any, about the negatives that Black people were doing. So the reach was far and wide and deep. And even after I retired, people would walk up to me and say, Lynn Norment, I know you. You interviewed me or you included me in the story about this or that or the other. And sometimes it got to the point I didn't remember these people. They didn't remember me and that experience for them being in Ebony because we went beyond doing just the celebrities or just the athletes or just the big time business people. And it was my great pleasure to meet the business people as well and the civic leaders as well. But a lot of, depending on what the subject was, everyday people were included in the magazine, depending on the theme of the story. black women who play golf, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Or one that I knew well was growing up with a stepmother, because I grew up with a stepmother.
Mm-hmm.
My editor said, Lynn, why don't you write about yourself? I said, oh, no, 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 I'm not touching that. But our people who, grew up with stepmen. Matter of fact, one person in particular was a close friend of the Obamas now. She was included in that story. And she and I became good friends anyway. So it reached far and wide and deep. And I was always very happy to hear from somebody who said I did
well,
included them in the story.
well, let me make this connection, and this just hit my mind. So now, you like I grew
Mhm.
up seeing Ebony, and now how did that hit you juxtaposed against some of your early experiences? I'm gonna point out one. Um, Tent City happened right down the street from you.
That's right.
So how did those two? Because now that was an early experience. I don't know if you experienced it firsthand, but I know you heard about it, and now you're working for Ebony Magazine. Talk to us about that a little bit.
You know, I saw much discrimination in my hometown. Tent City happened when I was too young to know about it personally.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got to college and beyond, I started hearing about Tent City, and I said, that's there. And then I knew people who were sharecroppers who ended up leaving that area. And I said, well, that's probably why they were leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Sharecroppers put them off and they went north.
Mm-hmm.
So it became very meaningful to me that it happened right there, literally in my backyard. That
Mm-hmm.
was an area, Somerville, Tennessee. I mean, to get to Memphis, we went from Bolivar to Whiteville, then Somerville. So we went right through that area. So I knew all about it. So it was touching. And I did read more about it and learn more. Um, yes, Tent City, and then the other things, and like with Martin Luther King being assassinated right there, right here in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being with my family gathered around our television and crying because at that time it just seemed like the whole world was falling apart around us, kind of like we feel now about how the
Mm-hmm.
world is, And and so then going to the Civil Rights Museum after it was built, and I think that was after I had left that all of that happened. It just it just made me feel and to understand how resilient we are as people. And
Well,
that is important. And that I think that's part of why I felt like it was so natural for me to work for Ebony and do the kinds of stories that I did, to be a part of Ebony and the Ebony family. And we called ourselves a family as we told the story of Black America from a different perspective.
well, now let's transfer now or transition to the present day. What are some of the things that the public needs to understand and know about the challenges facing Black media then and now?
You know, ironically, a lot of the challenges are the same, but it seems like we were doing better with Black media then than we are now. Um, for Ebony and all the Black media, all the Black newspapers, and of course, I became familiar with all the Black publishers when I worked for Ebony. But as competitors, but the newspapers, I considered them just a part of the family. Um, but advertising was so important but just as important was the support of our community.
Mm-hmm.
Support of our community. Advertising is based on how many people you have supporting and reading your publication. And so I saw that from inside out. But Mr. Johnson himself would go out and present to potential advertisers and often bring them in. He was a great salesperson, a great salesperson. But he also had his heart on the Ebony audience and what people wanted to read about. He didn't just turn that over to the editorial team. We would come up with stories. The list would be whittled down and presented to him, and he would make the final decision on what stories would go into the magazine. So I saw him in that role and realized the importance of advertising. And of course, as part of the editorial team at Ebony, we were supposed to like leave the advertisers alone, even though they would sometimes try to underhandedly, reach out to you
Mm-hmm.
and get some editorial favor. But we knew we weren't supposed to deal with that. So that was important then, and it's important now. Of course, the the editorial side, and I'll just say newspapers, magazines, it all came to a great, let's say, bump in the road. I left Ebony in 2009, so it started in the 2000s, with the computers and the internet, social media, all of that became competitors to, especially to print media. It
Mm-hmm.
changed how people received their news or sought their news. And for many of them, it was a lot easier to pick up the phone or the computer, social media, and get all the information that there was a time you could only get from reading a magazine or a newspaper. Advertisers, they weren't loyal to anybody. They went after the readers. That
Mm-hmm.
was their purpose. And that began to affect Ebony, but also the white owned publications as well. Some of the magazines I receive now, they're practically giving them away and they have very little ads. They still are beautiful and glossy and have all this pretty stuff, but the ads are very thin. So that's what happened, not only to Black media, but to the media in general, especially print media. And we see that with our own publications here locally. Um, but with the Black media, we have there's certain people who come to mind who have sought their own way of doing it, and you have to be innovative and creative. Of course, Don Lemon was let go, and at one point, yeah, I guess Joy Reid was let go,
Mm-hmm.
and Roland Martin at one time was let go, but he started his own thing long before some of the others did. But they knew how to hold on to their audiences, cultivate new followers, and they're what we call in the business independent journalists. And they appear to be doing well, and people
Mm-hmm.
still follow them and follow their broadcast, their network, and they have gone to YouTube and other means in addition to having their own networks. Um, but at the same time, I hear about Black uh, print publications that are doing well. I mean, some of the black newspapers. I was just reading something about a newspaper in St. Louis, and I knew the publisher many years ago. I know he's still there, but one of our top people in NABJ left wherever he was and dedicated his time to building the paper up. And I hear that is doing well. And I know that a lot of other publications continue to do well. But it's a struggle. It was back then, it is today.
Well, on that, do you have, well, first of all, the landscape is so different because not only do you have journalists,
Yes,
but you have freelancers,
yes,
podcasters, content creators. You have all of this.
yes.
And for example, where you would probably label me a podcaster, I try to operate with some level of journalistic integrity, but that's
Mhm.
not always the case. So, how
No.
do we navigate all of this? Because it seems like people get more information from the content creators and the podcasters than from the journalists.
And they seek information from those outlets. And it all depends on the person. Some people aren't interested in material or facts that reflect the truth and reality. And that's something that I noticed and other journalists noticed years ago that everything, people think that everything they read, let's say online or wherever, is the truth
Yeah,
because it's written, but it's not. It was written by people who were opinions. They were writing their opinions, um, but that was not fact. And people today get all mixed up about that. Well, I read this on the internet. I had people tell me, I read this on the internet. I said, but that doesn't mean it's true. What? On the internet. I said, anybody can write anything on the internet. And people writing blogs. Blogs are not journalistic stories. Blogs are just opinions. Now, you might have some journalists writing blogs, and I feel like, theirs are based more on opinion. But, I do, as you know, a column for the Commercial Appeal newspaper, which is where I started my career. I moved back to Memphis and I was asked to do a column, which brought things full circle for me. But my columns are based on facts. They're written more like stories. Is my style. I never studied column writing, so I write as though I'm doing a story, but just not as tight. I
hmm
do a lot of fact checking though, and I do a lot of research. Um, but it's not like some columns are written, but if you write a column for a newspaper, I would like to think that your facts are real. And I don't insert as much of my own opinion as many do. So, but podcasters, they can be people who like try to bend the opinion and their
hmm
listeners to their point of view.
hmm
And then some of them are just presenting the facts.
hmm
People need to understand the difference, but I just don't know how real that is ever going to be again because there's so much, and this is a word I never thought I'd use, propaganda. Um, so much propaganda in podcast and what you see on the internet and even on TV and stuff. So it's a different world now. It's a different world.
I agree with you. In your closing thoughts, first of all, do you have any advice for those of us who are in this space, journalists, podcasters, and content creators? And
Mm.
what are some of your final thoughts as to where we are right now?
As far as podcasters and others who own some of the newer, um, let's say, information news sharing outlets, I like the idea of a podcast, and I just, let's say, I pray and hope that more people will use them for positive purposes to disseminate information that is real and less opinionated. Now, some people may say you are opinionated, and they certainly can say I am opinionated.
Mm-hmm.
My opinions, your opinions are based on facts. We aren't distributing false information that we know is false. Like
Yeah.
we aren't outright lying. And
Yes.
a lot, too much of that happens today, too much of it. And I just find it disgusting. So my advice is to still present yourself, hold yourself in an ethical manner when you present information in a podcast, or if you're an independent journalist, be real. Service the people who trust you, but you have to build that trust. You have to build that trust. To young journalists, and maybe to some of the ones who are out here now, young journalists and those who want to be podcasters and independent journalists or journalists, period, you have to do your work, do your research. You have to read. You have to love to read or get your information otherwise. The more information that you have, the more you can present yourself in a manner that is trustworthy instead of being so narrow with just a narrow thought line. If you want to go far and stay in this business, you need to open your mind, take in information, decipher it, get rid of the flutter, and come up with some good ideas. And you have to always, as a journalist, have ideas. I feel like I succeeded in the business because I could come up with good ideas. That's how I moved ahead at Ebony, in addition to working on my writing and all that other stuff. But you have to be able to come up with good ideas. Although I feel like sometimes I just can't think of the right column to write, but that's all a part of it, and I work hard on it. And I tell young journalists, you have to read, you have to read, you have to read. And regardless of what area of the media you want to go into, you need to be able to write. No matter what your future and how you see your future, being able to write helps you. Whether you are a podcaster or a broadcast journalist or a radio journalist, or even if you're not a journalist, being able to write will take you farther in your career. So we need to learn that in high school and in college, how to express ourselves and our thoughts. You have to be able to do that. You got to write proposals to even sell your story idea. You have to be able to think, and you have to be able to write.
Well said. Well said.
Mhm.
Well said. I want to thank you for being with us today. You have blessed us. I want to honor who you've been to our culture. I want to honor who you've been in terms of journalistic integrity and journalism in general. Thank you for being with us today.
It's been my pleasure. And anytime, Dr. Hutchinson, I have so much love and respect for you. And a shout out to my pastor, Reverend Anthony Henderson at Beulah Baptist Church. He respects and loves you, and that transfers to me.
All right, and thank you. And that's my friend. All
And
right, so y'all heard it. We're going to end it right here. Thank you for being with us.
thank you.